coming. We've seen the photo, we've read the tweets, and we've heard the excuses. We stand appalled and aghast at the humanitarian crisis at the border. In the past few weeks, we've had people contacting us, their local party, asking what they can do and what we will do. And we've tried to respond as best we can with the resources that we have. We have posted on our social media, as you heard from Mike, and we've visited our congressional representatives. And today we will devote our seminar time to this issue. Immigration is a huge, complicated issue, and we only have an hour. So today we're focusing on learning more about the border from a first-hand volunteer, discovering the needs of non-citizens in our community, and taking a broader look at the legal aspects of asylum. I want to say a special thank you to our speakers. They did not hesitate when I asked them just 2 short weeks ago to join us today, and to also condense their vast knowledge into 20-minute segments. We're going to try to cover a lot. We have a slightly different program, just hang on. It's going to be a short but informative ride. With that, I will introduce our first speaker. She is Bonnie Uffman. She grew up on a farm in north central Kansas. Serving with the Peace Corps in South America was the highlight of her young adult life. Since then, she has lived primarily in Oregon and then back in Kansas. She has degrees in secondary education, community psychology, and counseling psychology. She spent several decades working in community mental health and is currently in private practice in Lawrence as a psychotherapist. She has visited the border, I believe, 5 times and is planning to return. Thank you.
Wow. I'm here to share some of my experiences about my 5 trips to the border. I'm not sure how much I can cover in 15 minutes, 15 or 20 minutes, but I'll do what I can. When I first heard about children being intentionally separated from their families is when I could no longer ignore the issues. All the problems with immigration were going on, of course, way before that. But this cruelty, this torture gets beyond the, well, I can look away and focus on something else. So I started looking for what could I do. And my first possibility was I saw online a request from Granny's Respond, which is an organization, New York-based organization. And they were looking for someone to help out at the border in McAllen, Texas. I took a few deep breaths and said, okay, I've got to do this. At McAllen, there's a group called Angry Tias and Abuelas, Angry Aunts and Grandmothers. And they've been helping out at the bus station and at the local respite center, which is part of Catholic Charities. In McAllen, asylum seekers newly released from detention are dropped off at the bus station. And they are then led to the Catholic Charities Respite Center. After being given food, shower, clean clothing, and spending the night, they return to the bus station to head off to their sponsors in various parts of the country. It was overwhelmingly sad to see a group of people coming into the bus station. They would be shuffling in very quietly, not a word, in line. It was, one of the volunteers there said that she read numerous times that when a volunteer comes from the outside, when they see that first, she sees them heading to the bathroom because you can't see it without crying. One of the encouraging things is when this group of people then goes to the respite center, is given some love and attention and food and clean clothing. When you see them coming back the next day, I see hope at that point, hope that wasn't there when they came shuffling in, and it is literally shuffling in. Their shoelaces have been taken from them. Their dignity has been taken from them. There's a small group of dedicated volunteers. They could use a lot of help. Lizzie, one of the regular volunteers, who I spent most time with during the time I was there, said that prior to her first trip to the bus station, she described herself as a housewife and a birder. But she kept hearing about what was happening there, went to see for herself, and she said that she's been there regular basis, many days a week for every week since. And in her words, once you know what's happening, you can't not know. In other words, it's completely changed her life and the course of her life in terms of how she's spending her time. By the way, the local Presbyterian church offered me a couch in their basement and keys to their big, beautiful building during the time I was there. It was encouraging to see all the support from so many people. They didn't even ask to check my ID. It's, here's the keys, you know, what do you need? That was encouraging. My next trip was to Las Cruces, New Mexico. I went there to see what I could learn and how I could help out in any way possible. I was super impressed with how well the place was run. There is an Annunciation House in El Paso, gets hundreds and hundreds of people coming through, asylum seekers newly released, who need a respite center someplace, and they divide them up into various respite centers in the area. There are 4, most of which are in churches. There are 4 churches in Las Cruces that house respite refugees. What I heard from the volunteers and the staff there is that although it's mostly staffed by locals, an impressive array of locals are standing there waiting to help out in any way they can. But they also appreciate the occasional visits from out-of-state volunteers because they want people to see. They want people outside of their area to be aware of what's going on. So, when asked to speak here, of course, I couldn't say no because it's like if I'm going to do the trips to the border, part of my job is spreading the word and increasing awareness. I heard the horror stories about what the refugees are fleeing from. Everything you read about this, it's true, and you hear it over and over from the various refugees at the border. I was amazed by their strengths in keeping on and impressed by the volunteers who donate so much of their time and even their financial resources to help. When I asked one of the volunteers about a particular family, so they finally, they got the money together and this family was able to go, the volunteer said, well, I donated the money. And I know that happens a lot. And she said the family said they would pay her back when they could. So she did because she knew they needed to get there. After returning from New Mexico, I decided that my next trip would be to Treviño, Texas, where the largest children's prison in the country. And there a group of activists were there witnessing, drawing attention to what was happening in Treviño. By the time I was getting close to getting it together to get down there, it was closed. After 3 months of witnesses being present, drawing attention to the situation, the facility was closed. That was encouraging. Lots of people around the country were asking, where do we go next? What do? We want to keep working on this. And Homestead, Florida became the next obvious choice because of the number of children imprisoned there. So I headed to Homestead. Met a woman with whom there's a lot of people in contact with each other on the internet about this, and a woman from New Hampshire said, I'm going next week, you want to come with me? I already got my ticket, you want to go? Okay, that's specific, this makes it a little easier, someone else is doing the plan. We went. We were the second and third witnesses to arrive in Homestead. One local attorney started out several days earlier. When he first heard about it, he was out there day one. We arrived very soon thereafter, and people started trickling in. There were a half dozen, a dozen during the time I was there. On a good day, maybe up to 20. My focus there was on holding signs, talking with people. That included talking with staff as they were passing by on their way to work, guards in other words, talking with drivers passing by, talking with news media people. All of it is about increasing awareness. This felt useful enough to me that I returned for a second time. I flew the first time, drove the second time, and realized this is not something I can keep doing. It's just, the tip of Florida is not real accessible from here. But I want to say that I was pleased to learn recently that 1,000 to 2,000 people, depending on who's guessing, showed up for the last week's Lights for Liberty. The momentum is growing there. A whole lot more attention has been drawn to what's happening in Homestead along with other places. And thousands of people is just beyond my comprehension that there were that many people there in that small town. And I know there were other groups in Miami, which isn't that far away. It wasn't like everyone from the state that cared headed down to Homestead. So on to my next trip. My next trip was Brownsville, Texas. I left for there about a month ago. How am I doing for time?
Great.
10 minutes right now? Okay. In Brownsville, there's years in the summer, they have more teachers there. And teachers seem to be big on volunteering at all of these events. In the winter, snowbirds come their way. What the description I heard is that someone who comes to Florida looks around, what do I do now? And they hear about this, and oh, I could go there. And so a lot of them show up to volunteer. And the other group is church groups. And I met people from all over the country who were there to help, to volunteer. And I do want to say I appreciate what churches are doing in this area. I want to tell you about one, maybe I don't have time for that. Okay, on the bridge, I wanted to give you a specific example of someone I met, but that can't be done in this time frame. Across the bridge, there are people waiting from Cuba, Venezuela, Central America, Russia, Africa, just from seemingly all over the world. But their stories blended a lot. All of them are fleeing poverty, starvation, and or violence. The trip for most, of course, was dangerous. This is parts of, I'm sure you know. Again, the strength in being able to do this is amazing. This is the first place where I met families and would come back to see them the next day and the next day and the next day. So I get to know people a little bit, which is different than what happens at the bus station. What I experienced in every place I went is people were incredibly grateful. Not quite sure when they first arrived, can we trust these people when we've been treated pretty meanly by a bunch of Americans so far. They soon become very trusting. What I experienced there was lots of hugs, lots of love. People, when the Team Brownsville comes out on their twice-a-day trip across the border, people, especially the children, run out to hug and greet, and everyone yells goodbye when they're leaving. It was harder to return home from this trip than previous ones, and that's based. And then I got to know individuals more. Prior to that, it was come and go, and you talk with someone for 10 or 15 minutes, and it's another person, another face, another story, and other stories all blend. But in Browns and across the border, I was able to meet people as individual people and hear some of their stories. I will tell you one of those. There's a family were waiting at the, they made their way across Mexico, had been waiting 2 months at the border to be able to cross. There can be several hundred people there, and our country lets in maybe 3 a day. So the waits are long. They are dependent on food from volunteers bringing in food and water, and they sleep on the concrete. And it is sweltering, unbelievably god-awful hot, day and night. One of the families that Facebook apparently is a big thing in various parts of the world. I think it's the cheapest way to communicate for some people. It gets down to that's all I've got. A person who, as I was leaving, said Facebook, and I said yes, and she sent me. And we are now Facebook friends. I had trouble sleeping the first few nights. I was home thinking about these people out there on the concrete, waiting for no one knows how long. And contacted this particular family and learned that they had somehow magically been released. They'd been waiting there for several months, and then they were allowed to go. By some magic, again, they escaped the Yalera, which I'm sure you've read about, the places where we freeze people out for a couple of days. Basically, it is really basic torture, trying to get people to decide they will go home instead. Somehow they didn't go there, they didn't go to detention, and they were able to get bus tickets and head to New York. But the reality is, once people get to wherever they're going, it's not like the story is over. This family right now is desperately trying to find a place to stay. They have one sponsor, they could stay there 2 weeks. The 2 weeks is up right now. They can't work legally. And people don't come across with money. Those that start out with money, it's stolen from them by the time they arrive in this country. And so they really are coming through with nothing. Many of whom cannot speak English. If I picture myself let loose in the middle of New York with nothing and not speaking the language, I can't even comprehend that. And should they survive all of that, they still have a hearing, a court date set. They can go to the court date. The vast majority of people who go through the court date are then deported. The family of 5 that I mentioned earlier, they fled the country. My understanding is the woman was running for office, wanting to make things better in her country, and got so many death threats that it was not possible to stay. 2 of their children had illnesses of different kinds. One was having seizures. The question is, and I think it says 3 minutes maybe. The question is, and I wish I'd left more time for this part, the question is what to do. For me, having a plan is something that I can do, anything that I can do to counter the injustice that I am so aware is happening, helps keep me sane. I'm in a time in life where travel to the border or something is doable for me. I know that doesn't work for everyone. But there is so much to be done, and what I would encourage each of you is to do whatever you can, whatever that is. One small thing, try to do one small thing a week, even if that is, a letter, a phone call, whatever it is, we need to make change. And the more people that get into this, the sooner that can happen. Right now, I'm thinking that Fort Sill, Oklahoma may be my next step. That is the detention center is likely to be open in a few weeks. It's for children, same as Homestead. And it's the closest one to here. It's more doable for me to go to Homestead and also, to Fort Sill, and also share some of what I learned from the other places. So that's likely where I will be heading next. That or maybe as an Annunciation House sometime during the winter in El Paso. I am hoping, hearing a lot of support from people that family I mentioned, they are desperately in need of a sponsor at this point. There are individuals and communities across the country who are doing this. The closest one I'm aware of is I know it's the minister of the Unitarian Fellowship in Topeka, and I think with the help of her congregation, they are sponsoring a family. That's something I hear interest in here. I'm hoping that there is. I would love for us to be able to do that. I put a sign-up sheet out as you walk out the door. There's 2 sign-ups on the right-hand side as you walk out. If you just put your name and email so that we can contact you, just to get together with other people who are also interested in coming up with a plan. One is if you think you might want to go to Fort Sill or support what's happening there in any way. And the other is if you are interested in any way of being a part of sponsoring a family. I guess that's it. I can't squeeze in any more.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your work and for visiting with us today. We will now hear from some local advocacy groups and about the needs in our community. We have Medina Salati and Dioselin Todd. Medina Salati is a member of the Lawrence Interfaith Refugee and Immigrant Ministry, KC for Refugees, and Kansas-Missouri Dream Alliance. She also volunteers with Centro Hispano. She is the daughter of an immigrant and is also married to an immigrant. She went through a harrowing 2-year ordeal to get her husband home after he was deported in 2014. She's a strong advocate for immigrants and works tirelessly to educate and inform people about the need for immigration reform in our government and to get people more involved. And Dioselin Todd is the lead community organizer of El Centro and co-founder of Urban Works, LLC. She came to the U.S. when she was 6 years old and is originally from Guatemala. She is the daughter of immigrants and an immigrant herself. She was not meant to succeed, and these are her words. A lot of doors tried to shut down before she even began. She was a U visa holder because a crime was committed to her family. However, all of the no's became what ifs for Dioselin as she asked, so what do I do now? Her whole basis of work has been to educate and inform her community, raise awareness of situations that are happening in our backyard, both politically and civically, and to create more advocates, because our next generation is our future. Please join me. Okay, we have one. And I wanted to invite more of our groups in, and that's why we're kind of changing from a speaker to a forum. Please bear with us. I would just like to ask these ladies to please talk about the groups that they represent and volunteer with, and what they are doing in our community.
So, hi, again, my name is Dioselin Todd. I'm the lead community organizer at El Centro. And we work in Wyandotte, Johnson County, and Shawnee in Topeka. And what we're doing is in my department, which is the Advocacy and Civic Engagement Department, we have 4 programs under us. One of them is Know Your Rights for Undocumented Individuals. We also have partnered up with other collaborators, and we have Know Your Rights for agencies as well, that we could go ahead and do trainings. We also do clinics for both legal residents who are trying to become citizens, and we also do DACA renewals. And that's for all the dreamers who need those DACA renewals. We do our clinics for free. We give them an appointment with lawyers for free. The only thing that they have to pay is the application fee, which, if it's okay, I'll say it right now, for citizenship is $725 per person. And the dreamers are $495 per dreamer, per student, not counting the lawyer's fees with that. So that's where we help out a lot with that, and if we have funds, then we are more than able to help them as well with the fees that they have to spend, if we are capable and if we have funds. With voting, we are advocating for voting engagement because we want our communities to be heard, our marginalized communities. We're focused on Latinos, but we're open up to anybody and everybody. With that, just real quick, we're doing voter engagement, literacy, terminology, turnout, voter and issue campaigns, and leadership building. All of this is bilingual. Everything is in Spanish and English, and that's my biggest emphasis, that I want to make sure that everything that's out there, it's in their language so they can understand, and it's broken down to the system that they're able to go in and participate into.
I'm Medina Salati. I got very involved in immigration and the issues I didn't even know about until my husband got deported. I volunteer for 4 organizations. One is the Lawrence Interfaith Refugee and Immigrant Ministry. We help local refugees and immigrants. We organize fundraising events. We sell tamales. The last few events have raised money for Centro Hispano, and we have a Margaritas for Margarita event coming up September 9th at J. Wilson, so I hope you will go. Centro Hispano provides help to local Latino families. They help with anything the families need, connecting them to services, connecting them with legal help if they need that, navigating all kinds of red tape, and they also, one of the main things they provide is Spanish language counseling and therapy. And I volunteer in Kansas City with KC for Refugees. They are a volunteer-based group that helps resettle local refugees, helps them with English tutoring, job placement, generally anything they need. Other organizations that also help resettle are the Jewish Vocational Services, Catholic Charities, and Del Lam. For them, I actually have a Syrian refugee family that I'm helping teach English. And then I also volunteer with the Kansas-Missouri Dream Alliance. They're an advocate group for immigrant rights. They're a political group. They help with DACA renewals and advocate for higher education for undocumented youth. And they do a lot of community and political organizing. They meet with elected officials.
Share what you see as our greatest needs in our community and how we can become involved.
Honestly, there's so many amazing groups out there that what we really need is bodies to help us out. There is so much to do. There's hotlines, there's rallies, there are events, there's trainings, there's all these different things that are going on that there is small groups that are working on it, and we need the most help that we can get. Going out with us to go canvas. And our canvassings, even thinking about KSMO, that there's also AIR and KCK, that when we do canvassings, we not only pair them up with voter engagement, but we also pair them up with know your rights to give that information as well. Because we realize that not everybody is able to register to vote. So even if they're not registered to vote, we still give them other information so they know what services are out there. So just kind of as that an example, we just need bodies. If you can help us and give us a couple of volunteer hours to go and talk to senators, to go write testimonies, to go canvass door to door, to help us draft an application, to help us lead one of the clinics that we host as well, both KSMO and El Centro. El Centro does them at the end of the month. KSMO does them in the beginning of the month, because there's such a great need out there that we really need to have a lot more organizations, as much as possible, create their advocates and create their leaders. We're more than willing to come out and train. We're more than willing to give you guys the information, let you guys know what's going on, and guide everybody in these processes. But in reality, there's a lot of work to get done. There's a lot of need for people to come and raise awareness as well, and even just in the civically mindset. I would say, even just looking, if you see incidents happening, if you see somebody getting pulled to the side and they're being treated they're being mistreated. And because of their color of skin, one of the first things that we say is please report what you're seeing. Help us out with that. That gives us evidence so we can show what's really going out there. The other thing that if you're seeing somebody else mistreat somebody or even put up a stereotype that isn't true, it would kind of be like, think about it like bullying. Stop it. Some people don't have that voice to stop those moments. Some people don't have the knowledge or are fearful to even speak up in those moments. And some of us have those voices. Some of us have those positions, those roles that can speak for other individuals that otherwise wouldn't be able to speak. And sometimes you see a lot of these incidents just happening more often than usual. The other thing would be, as you guys have done, I heard, call your senators, call your representatives to tell them we want different ordinance, we want reforms, we want a clean act, we want to encourage others to know and raise the awareness that it's not what you see in social media. Everybody's not like that. There's so many different people out here that definitely just need the help. And just as a human level, say hi, talk, get to know us, ask us about our history, ask us about our story. We would be more than happy to share it. Those are things that I feel like you guys can help out in so many different ways.
Well said, Yasmin, thank you.
Yeah, she's right. Making immigrants feel welcome as much as humanly possible. It was something that my father did. He was from Russia, and when immigrants would come here from Russia, he was someone who was always getting a call to help them, and that's what he did. And that's kind of, I live my life helping immigrants feel welcome and helping them with anything they need. I wasn't surprised to hear that a lot of teachers are volunteering. I work as a teacher. Teachers know what the effect of trauma on children is doing to them. And it really needs to stop. And the only way it's going to probably stop is if enough people are speaking out. Things really do change if enough people speak up and get involved. I feel like a lot of people are putting their head in the sand right now because they're so upset with all the political fighting that's going on and all the misinformation that's out there. But we need to bring people in. We need to not attack people. Democrats need to not attack each other. And we need to get this election turned around, and that's really what will help immigrants. So call your local representatives. I call Steve Watkins' office every once in a while. A very nice immigrant from England answers the phone. And I'm always very friendly with him, and I just remind him I'm a constituent, and I want Representative Watkins to know I feel very strongly. I think the last call I made was regarding DACA. They had a vote. They were supposed to have a vote on DACA. So, yeah, please do that. The sheet, hopefully you all got the sheet with the phone numbers on there, but use those. There's people, that's all they do all day is answer calls from constituents, and they record kind of what you say. You don't have to talk for a very long time. Just say, I feel very strongly that Steve Watkins should support this or should be against this. And they record that and they give him the information. So please do it.
Thank you. And real quickly, how did you become involved in advocating for immigration?
So, as stated before, I am an immigrant. I was brought here when I was 6 years old. Actually, I had a visa, came through here, airplane, everything. My first experience through immigration was as a 6-year-old in Texas, when they stopped my family and they started asking my mom and myself individually, because they separated all of us, why we were coming here. My dad worked here. In Guatemala, there was a dictatorship that was happening, so a lot of people had to flee. One of them was my dad because he was a pastor, and they wouldn't allow so much religious talk because they saw that as a part of a growing rebellion against the government, so they would stop that. So kind of fast forwarding, that's when my dad was here. That's when we came here after my dad was here just to reunite our family. that was my first experience. I really didn't understand it. Then my other experience came when the U visa happened, when the crime was committed to my family. I still have a couple hard time kind of describing what that was, but it was not fun during my high school years, go to court, seeing my family members being hurt, seeing the comments and all those different things that we had to surpass. As I was finishing that, I had a full ride scholarship, and I actually wanted to go to school for medicine. Unfortunately, as I held a legal status, I wasn't legal enough to have my application reviewed, and I got the risk of losing my scholarship because they didn't understand the status that I had. Needless to say, at 17 years old, I had to be looking for petition lists, how to get lawyers against schools that wouldn't review my application and even my own scholarship, try to figure out how can I retain it when I had worked on it since I was in the 6th grade. So there was so many different things that were, as mentioned before, were shutting down for me, but definitely persevering in. And during my college years, I learned a lot. I was actually able to graduate from KU in 2017 with my bachelor's, which was amazing. And now I'm doing all this different work. And that's not it. Thank you. It was definitely a hard road, but going through that and seeing my family go through that and seeing other organizations step up and help us out, it definitely made an impact where I knew that's where I wanted to be, and I knew that I didn't want somebody else to feel the same way that I did, and I never want any other student feeling like they have no choice or no opportunities. When we're smart, we want to give back to the community, we want to be here, and we also want to be leaders just because we love this community as much as everybody does. So with that, that's how I got involved. I couldn't, like someone said before, our previous speaker, she said I couldn't turn a blind eye. I couldn't unsee what I saw, and that's why I got involved.
Well, you kind of heard how I got involved when my husband went through a deportation. So that was very eye-opening for me. When it first happened, I was in a state of denial and saying, that's not possible. I'm an American citizen. He hasn't killed anybody or committed any violent crimes. But I learned and learned and learned. And yes, it was possible, and it's happening to a lot of other people. There are huge support groups on Facebook of U.S. citizens and non-citizens who've lost family members for deportation, and it needs to stop, as I've said. I think we all need to think about some of the things that are behind some of this, and I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but most of these detention centers are for-profit industries. That means they have a financial interest in there not being immigration reform. They have an interest in Congress not passing any legislation that helps people become legal, because the more people they can detain, whether that's DACA recipients after DACA expires, if they can detain those people for as long as possible, and then before they get deported, that's their goal. And it's financially feasible for them to do that. We need to be thinking about this. We also need to be thinking about talking to conservatives and helping people understand, helping politicians understand. I'm so glad to know that people are visiting these politicians' office. I want to go with you next time too, because a lot of them just they don't even understand the complexity of immigration law. They don't understand like the law that got my husband deported, and he was banned from re-entering the U.S. for 10 years. Luckily, because I'm a U.S. citizen, and for some other reasons, he was able to get a waiver. It took 2 years to get him this waiver. But there's many people who are deported and banned for life from the country for something as simple as they've crossed twice the border. They could be married to a U.S. citizen with U.S. citizen children, but they're going to be banned for life from entering the country simply because they've crossed over twice, or because they checked a box on a form that they weren't supposed to check. There's a huge number of people out there that are trying to get laws changed, so we just need people to step up as much as possible.
I'm sorry, I want to highlight one of the points that she made. These detention centers are for profit. Last time I heard, they make $755 a day per child. So, yeah, they are for profit. There's a lot of things going on that definitely is not highlighted when it's spoken in the media. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you. Here is David Treviño. David has committed his life to service. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Navy Reserves for a combined 28 years. He retired as Master Chief from the U.S. Navy Reserves in July 2011, and then served with the U.S. 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain from November 2011 to June 2013, after the 9/11 attacks. David graduated from KU Law in December 2006 and was admitted to the Kansas Bar in April of 2007. He established his own law practice and is focused on immigration and employment law since 2007. He has assisted persons in navigating the immigration progress to become lawful permanent residents and U.S. citizens. He has represented clients seeking relief from removal before the immigration courts in Kansas City, Missouri, Dallas, Texas, and Louisiana. Some forms of relief that he has presented on behalf of clients include, but are not limited to, cancellation of removal, adjustment of status, and asylum and convention against torture. His office also assists persons seeking deferred action for childhood arrivals, or DACA, U visas, and fiancé visas. They have provided legal assistance to persons from more than 60 different countries. Please join us, David.
Thank you, Noreen, and thank you for inviting me to this event. And thank you, all the individuals that braved the heat this morning to be here. I know it's a little toasty out there, and of course I'm wearing this. But I wanted to at least be presented. Before I go on to my presentation, I do want to make a comment that everything that I've pretty much accomplished professionally and personally, I've not done alone. I've been blessed to have wonderful mentors, colleagues, co-workers, friends that have helped me along the way. And that also applies to what I've done at my law office now for about 12 years, is that I do not act alone. I've had wonderful staff that have helped me along the way and that have helped immigrants from different countries to become permanent residents and eventually become U.S. citizens in some instances. So I wanted to give a shout out to them. In the current administration, it's kind of hard to keep up. We are getting hit almost daily with new policy proposals, new rules wanting to be implemented by the administration to modify, amend existing regulations and how certain cases are handled, either at the border or by the immigration courts. So I went ahead and prepared a presentation for you all, a PowerPoint presentation titled Asylum in the Age of Trump and the Trump Administration Policies Aimed to Fracture Well-Established Practices in Asylum Law. Next slide, please. So as soon as President Trump took office, and even prior to then, you all heard the rhetoric about wanting to curb illegal immigration and even to limit legal immigration to this country, the so-called Muslim ban. So shortly after taking office, he There were a couple of executive orders that he signed, and one of those was basically ending the executive action for the Central American Minors Program. That program was put in place in order to allow minors of adults, their parents being here in the United States and then obtaining legal status so those minors could join their parents so that they would not be separated from their parents because those parents left their country to escape violence or persecution. So when President Trump signed this action to end the program, there were already 2,700 children that had already been conditionally approved. And so basically it killed those approvals. They were basically terminated at that point. Well, that action was found unlawful and enjoined. So as I go through this presentation, there'll be a number of instances the administration has taken that various groups have filed lawsuits on behalf of those impacted by those proposed actions by the administration. A lot of those actions are going to be actually filed in the Ninth Circuit in either Hawaii, California, Washington. Next slide. The executive orders were designed to also discourage asylum seekers. Executive Order 13767, Section 6, is calling for the mandatory detention of asylum seekers pending outcome of their removal case. Additionally, in June 20th of 2018, so last summer, there was an executive order enforcing 8 U.S.C. 1325A, the so-called zero tolerance policy. And under that section of the code, the government can charge someone crossing the United States without authorization, without any kind of status, permission to enter the United States. It can actually charge them with a crime in federal court. And that crime could result in up to, or that action, that illegal crossing, could result in, on the first offense, up to 6 months in jail with, I believe, a $250 civil penalty. On the second attempt, that increases to up to 2 years. So if someone entered illegally, stayed here in the United States for a while, had family, had a job, then they received a removal order or an order for voluntary departure back to their country, and they, again, if they entered initially illegally the first time to get here, and then entered illegally a second time, that would be one of the examples. Again, the penalty would be up to 2 years in jail. So last summer, President Trump basically signed this executive order saying, hey, look, it's a zero tolerance policy now. So if you're going to cross, we're going to charge you. There have been numerous accounts of a room full of individuals, aliens, charged with entering the country illegally. You see a courtroom full of aliens, 30, 40, 50 at a time, where they present themselves before the judge. In most, if not all instances, they don't have counsel, and they're basically herded in and in large numbers being found guilty of this offense. And that does impact their ability to be able to get status later on or be able to be approved for a visa to enter the United States later. Next slide. One of our previous speakers, Advocate Bonnie, mentioned about the family separation and what compelled her to go down to the border and see what was going on. Again, that's something that probably was happening even before summer of 2018, but that's when we really got to see what was going on. And again, the stated goal of that policy really was to discourage Central American families from traveling to the U.S. border and applying for asylum. This policy was challenged in a lawsuit out in California against the Ninth Circuit, and the court found that that was also unlawful. There's been a number of actions that the administration has taken in unison to result in that happening as far as the separation of families. One, the enforcement of 8 U.S.C. 1325A. So if an alien comes with a minor child and they are arrested, they're placed in a different detention, and that detention center is not, and again, that's the justification used by the administration, is, hey, we cannot put a child in a detention facility that's not suited for children. And that's pursuant to the Florida Settlement Agreement, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. But so they said, well, they're either a criminal or they're in a criminal proceeding, so we can't have the child there. So that led to some of the separation of the child from the parent. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, the zero tolerance. Any alien who attempts to enter the U.S. at any time and place not designated by an immigration officer could be found guilty of that violation and then subject to the penalties that I mentioned before: 6 months for the first offense, 6 months for the first offense, 2 years for the second offense, and 2 years thereafter for subsequent offenses. Next slide, please. As a result, what do you think would happen if the parents thought that if they cross over with their children, if they believed that they were going to be separated? What do you think a family might decide? Say, I tell you what, you might be better off, child, crossing by yourself, not with me, because we know that you're going to be subject to special protections, and they try to coordinate perhaps on, being able to get together once they go through that process. It's a harrowing experience, obviously. Having a child separated from the parent, but in some instances it might be better for them to do it that way as opposed to going in together and then being forcibly separated. So there's an increase in unaccompanied children seeking asylum. In addition, there's other various causes that are going on. There are gangs, there are sex trafficking, there are all kinds of abuses of children that are going on in what's called the Northern Triangle, which is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. So with all that going on, in many instances, the children, the parents just feel compelled to encourage their children to seek shelter elsewhere, to seek shelter in the United States. You've all seen the reports of children being held in these called hieleras, in cages. There's been lawsuits filed because they've been detained beyond the mandatory, or the 48-hour limit, which is kind of set up in the Florida settlement. It's after 48 hours, they should be released to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR. and I believe they're within the Department of Health and Human Services. But in many instances, because of the increased number that are coming in, they're overwhelmed, and so it's led to people being held in these centers longer than the 48 hours. Now, there is an exception under the Flores settlement that they can be held for up to 20 days, but the government has to show that it made a good faith effort to try to get the child out of detention within the specified time. And again, the Flores settlement, it does limit the length of time and the conditions under which the children can be incarcerated in immigration detention. That's currently being litigated in the Ninth Circuit. Some of you may have actually seen news reports of that. Next slide, please. Some recent developments are what's called metering and the Remain in Mexico policy. Metering is a system whereby a border agent will go up before the port of entry, so the asylum seeker does not actually get to the port of entry, but is stopped just shy of the port of entry, and they're basically saying that they encounter the asylum seeker, or that border agent encounters that asylum seeker, asks them what their business is, trying to come into the United States, seeing if they have a visa to come in, and if they don't, they basically put them on a list, and they're turned back, and they only allow a certain number of people to actually go through to the port of entry. So because of that metering that you may have seen in the news, you probably, I'm sure you've all saw the pictures of the father and the child that died in the Rio Grande because they did not want to wait. As Bonnie previously mentioned, there was an incident, there's several, I mean, it happens a lot. Several instances where people are waiting a month, 2 months out in the heat, sleeping on concrete with little to no provisions. And you even just think about the sanitary needs of the individuals. But they're so desperate, they're waiting in line. I'm sure the conditions are absolutely horrific. So what do? They try to take action to cross in between ports of entry so they can get apprehended by, they enter the United States, get apprehended by ICE or by Customs and Border Protection, CBP, and then being placed in, or requesting asylum at that point. That way they're getting around the wait time. Next slide, please. So, in November of 2018, because people were trying to circumvent having to wait, the Trump administration in November of 2018, they basically tried to render all non-U.S. citizens or non-citizens who enter the U.S. outside a port of entry ineligible for asylum. However, that contravenes the actual language in the statute under INA 208A1. In general, any alien who is physically present or who arrives in the U.S. at a port of entry or not may apply for asylum. So, again, that policy was challenged and is preliminarily enjoined, and again, that's a Ninth Circuit case, it's a Ninth Circuit case, California case, East Bay Sanctuary Covenant versus Trump. Next slide, please. In March of 2019, President Trump ordered Secretary Nielsen to close the El Paso port of entry and at the very least to deny entry to asylum seekers. Secretary Nielsen refused and shortly thereafter resigned. Next slide, please. The U.S. Refugee Asylum and International Operations Directory issues a new lesson plan on credible fear of persecution and torture determinations. The lesson plan is important because it's the lesson plan that the border agents will use in order to determine whether or not that individual has a credible fear for asylum. And if they indicate that they are applying for asylum, then they're going to get referred to an asylum officer that's then going to do the credible fear interview. So the lesson plan basically that existed prior to this proposed change is generally, it states that it's a non-adversarial process, because what you want to do, the whole purpose of the interview is to elicit the information from the individual, not to make it adversarial, but basically say, hey, look, I want to know, please tell me, why is it that you're seeking asylum? And so it's a very low threshold to meet. So most people, if they said, hey, look, I left my country because of gang violence, or because of my political opinion, or my race or nationality or religion, and that's why I'm coming here. I'm seeking protection because I cannot get protection from my country. If they could just state, in rough terms that they had a credible fear, they would be put into what's called INA 240 removal proceedings, in which they could then argue before the immigration judge their asylum case. But with this new lesson plan that just came out, I think it was just this week, and actually there's been a lot, or maybe it's a little bit longer, but it's been recent, but it's also, there's been a lawsuit filed trying to enjoin that lesson plan, because that lesson plan is now instructing the Border Patrol agents and asylum officers to, well, the argument is it's more adversarial now. And so they're trying to enjoin that. And I don't know if we've got a decision yet from the court, because that was just a newly filed lawsuit, again in the Ninth Circuit. Next slide, please. Again, in summary, the long-established asylum policies and procedures have become more restrictive, and they have the intent of discouraging and burdening the asylum seekers. In some instances, these policies do contravene U.S. treaty obligations. The U.S. is a party to the 1967 Protocol Convention relating to the status of refugees, and Congress enacted the Refugee Act of 1980. A refugee, basically, for those that don't know, a refugee is a person that has a well-founded fear of persecution that's based on their race, that's based on their nationality, their religion, their political opinion, or because they are being persecuted because they fall into a particular social group. And that's the subject of much litigation in the immigration courts. And so if they have a well-founded persecution based on those grounds, and because of that fear, they're either unable or unwilling to seek protection in their country, they qualify, they meet the criteria as a refugee. So nobody has to declare them as a refugee. If they meet that criteria, they are a refugee, and they're seeking protection here in the United States from that well-founded fear that they have. And it's at the border that they have to show a credible fear, which is not a very high bar. Next slide, please. Where am I on time? Did I go? Okay. Again, what can you do? And this has already been said previously. Call your representative, demand corrective action, demand a response from your elected officials. I can't tell you how many emails I've sent to my elected officials and have just received the cursory, we hear you response with really no substance or meat behind it. So it's just perhaps going to their offices and demanding an actual response to your concern. Support immigrant advocacy organizations. Again, the advocacy organizations that were here today, do what you can to support them. The ACLU, the Catholic Charities, American Immigration Council, they do wonderful things to fight for immigrants' rights. The Catholic Legal Immigration Network, Inc. Mobilize, vote, and stay informed. And final slide, please. Any questions? Please, I'd be more than willing to field any if anyone has one. Yes?
I was wondering, I had heard or been told or read that even though the judge ordered the children not to be taken away, that they're still doing it anyway.
Yes, I've heard those reports as well, that it's still happening. And again, the justification behind that, whether it really has any merit or not, is generally if the agent believes that the child is with a criminal or a coyote, or they're going to separate that child from that individual. Again, I'm not saying that's always the case, but those are some instances where they try to justify that. But I've also heard some anecdotes where, when questioned about why they actually separated them, there's very little meat on the bone.
David, I'm sorry, would you stick around after for questions?
Oh, sure.
There's another performance here in the
Oh.
auditorium, so we have been asked to stay on time today.
Well,
But thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
very much.
I'd like to thank again all our speakers, Bonnie, David, Medina, and Yoselin, and thank you all for coming today. You know, separation of children from their loving parent is not a partisan issue. It is a moral issue. And if we want to change it, and we want to provide better paths to naturalization and legal residency, we need to elect Democrats at every level, Congress, state, and local. And that is why we, the local Democratic parties, are working to educate and motivate voters in our community. Thanks again.